Thank you all for joining us at the Jamestown Foundation this morning. We're here to put an important development in the Caucasus and in Georgia, particularly into some context and for understanding what it means for the United States. In April, the Georgian Dream parliamentary party reintroduced the law on transparency of foreign influence. The bill had previously been introduced and withdrawn last fall after Georgian citizens protested in the streets. The reintroduction of the law and the inclusion of powers more in line with the Kremlin's anti-foreign agent law than befitting of a democracy once again brought sustained protests, in some cases as many as 200,000 people to the streets across Georgia, not just in the capital city, Tbilisi. The bill was vetoed by President Salam Zurabishvili, but the Georgian Dream was able to override the veto in Parliament on May 28th, and here we are 2 days later. Today, to help put these developments into context and explain why they matter to the United States, we're honored to host Anna Natsvlishvili, a Georgian MP and part of the parliamentary group LILO, Partnership for Georgia, and she was previously the chair of the Georgian Young Lawyers Association from 2014 to 2017. We're also honored to welcome Ambassador William Courtney, who is currently an adjunct senior fellow at the RAND Corporation. In a long and distinguished foreign service career, he served as the ambassador to Kazakhstan, and more importantly for today's conversation, as the U.S. ambassador to Georgia. Now I'd like to turn it over to Jamestown Senior Fellow Margarita Asanova to moderate our event and to lead the discussion. Thank you. Please unmute Margarita.
Okay. Thank you, Peter, for making the introductions, and welcome to our participants today. Anna from the Georgian Parliament, Anna Natsvlishvili. It's a difficult name to pronounce, but we will make an effort. And Ambassador Courtney. So we're going to focus on two things. First, Anna, if you can turn your telephone the other way around because your image is upside down, is it? It's a little...
Sorry for that. I thought
it's okay.
Is it better now?
Yep. No, it's somehow vertical.
Wait.
Is it? Okay, perfect. Now it's perfect. Thank you. Anna, please tell us what is happening with Georgia after weeks of protests of thousands and thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of people protesting against the so-called Russia law, which is going to impose restrictions on everyone, human rights organizations, civil society organizations, and also individuals who receive more than 20% of their funding from abroad. They're going to be subjected to penalties, they're going to be restricted, they could be punished, and the civil society is pretty much going to be muted and treated the way the Russian civil society is treated. What is going on now when the law is pretty much in effect after the parliament overturned the veto of President Zurabishvili?
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Margarita, and I want to thank Jamestown Foundation for this event. It's a great pleasure to be part of this discussion, particularly with former Ambassador Courtney and all of you. So thank you for focusing on Georgia when my country is at crossroads. Yes, as you very well articulated, the Russian-style law is back. Last year, Georgian public, Georgian opposition and civil society managed to stop it, and there was a promise from the government that they will never bring it back, but they breached the promise. That's not something unusual for Georgian Dream. Also very Russian style to break your own words and promises. And there is huge protest in the streets of Tbilisi, Kutaisi, Batumi, all over the country. So I want to put it very straightforwardly that this law has nothing to do with transparency, and it has actually nothing to do with NGOs filing declarations about their funding, but it has everything to do with power and control of independent voices. and organizations and groups who raise their voice against unlawfulness, against corruption, against arbitrary use of power, and Georgian Dream's Russian plans regarding Georgia. I also want to say that whatever is happening in Georgia now, although very emotional for all of us, it's not just about Georgia. It's about Russia, and it's about China, and it's about their increasing influence in this region, not only in Georgia. So what we are witnessing is basically something we've seen in many other parts of the world. It's fight between democracy and autocracy, between rule of law and state capture, between freedom and repressions. So the fight Georgians are fighting now is not just our fight, it's the fight for freedom everywhere and for the idea of freedom. So Georgia, which is very polarized society and quite fragmented, and I don't think it's by nature like that. I think propaganda and disinformation, very much inspired by Russia, worked to make Georgian society more and more fragmented. But what we are witnessing now is huge unity among all age groups, among all social groups, among different politically people with different political beliefs and taste, huge unity around the idea of Georgia joining EU and country choosing its EU and Euro-Atlantic future. And this is what Russia is trying to take away. Because for Russia, democratic Georgia, European Georgia, Georgia joining European and Euro-Atlantic world is definitely something they don't want. So Georgian Dream, unfortunately, is serving the interests of Kremlin rather than serving the interests of Georgian people, and they are fighting against the will of the nation. GD does not have constitutional majority in the parliament. Therefore, they cannot change the constitution of Georgia, which explicitly states that Georgia's foreign policy direction is Euro-Atlantic direction. For the record, this clause in the constitution was initiated by Georgian Young Lawyers Association and Transparency International. I was the member of the Constitutional Commission back then, and they were not very happy to put this clause, but it's there. So they cannot change the constitution, and the Russian law is an indirect way to change the foreign policy direction of Georgia and to undermine democratic credentials of the country. But people are continuing to fight, and no one is going to stop fighting. We are fighting. We have. This is an existential thing. We have no way back. If we lose this fight, we lose our country, and no one in Georgia wants to go back to Russian sphere of influence, because we know what that means. We know what that means. Trust me. I want to finish my my intervention by talking about U.S. steps. I think it's very, very important that the U.S. announced personal sanctions. I think it will have impact. It's very, very important to sanction high-ranking officials and their family members and those who are participating in this betrayal. But it's also very important to take steps to help Georgian people to enjoy, I cannot say free and fair elections because I'm not sure it's possible in an authoritarian system, but as much freedom and ability to take to make a choice in an enabling environment, in a secure environment, to have international monitoring missions mobilized. And US position is here very, very important. It's also very important we are fighting for our immigration to be able to vote. Unfortunately, Georgia has legal as well as illegal immigrants, but I think this time it's very, very important for US and other countries to understand how important it is for Georgian citizens to be able to, without repercussions, without fear of facing legal sanctions in US or anywhere, even if they are illegal immigrants, to be able to vote. Government is not taking proper steps to enable them to vote, but we are working with partners, and I think it's very important to help us in this sense that immigrants are able to vote. And also, it's very important for the US, I believe, to work with its democratic partners so that personal sanctions are also imposed by the EU, by the UK, and other democratic countries, because this is an effective tool, but it needs to be put in a timely manner. I'll stop here, but I'm ready for questions and answers and reflections.
Thank you very much. Let me start with the first question. Are the protests continuing in Tbilisi and other cities in Georgia at the moment as we speak?
So for today, for example, there is no large demonstration planned, but on a daily basis, there is something happening, either a march of students or professional unions gathering, or there is some creative ways of protesting. So it's not stopped. Even though the veto is overridden, the protests are not stopped. There are plans for continuing the protests, and so it will not stop. It will not stop until there is change of power, I guess.
You mentioned that there is going to be a fundraising concert this week?
Yes. So the government, and unfortunately Georgian judiciary, which is under heavy control of the government, is using the law which dates back to 1984, Soviet times. It's using Soviet time law, which is still unfortunately still in force, to sanction demonstrators, impose very large financial sanctions. Some of them even are spending days in prison. There are several criminal charges. So we are doing, on the 2nd of June, we are doing very big fundraising concert to help demonstrators to pay the fines.
Do you know how many people were injured? Is these cases light injuries or some of them are serious?
So yes, some people have been ambushed by people with masks during night hours in front of their houses and severely beaten. There are records, video footages that a demonstrator, like well-known influencer or well-known demonstrator, like public figures, are doing nothing, just talking or, standing there in the street, and law enforcement officials sort of attacking the person, dragging the person into the group, and then we see them beaten up severely. Some of them had to go through major surgeries to recover. There are people in detention under criminal charges, and more than 200 people have faced fines. And for Georgia, 200 demonstrators it shows the scale of repressions. Maybe for Russia it's not a big figure, but for a country of the size of Georgia, it's very serious scale. More than 200 people facing administrative trials and the penalties. It's serious. It's unprecedentedly big for Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you. So what are the next steps for the opposition? The leader of Lilo Party, Mamuka Khazaradze, posted on Facebook that the plans of the Russian government have been announced openly to us, he said, by stopping the Anaklia project. This is the deep water port that started being built by Western investors in Georgia. The Georgian Dream Party stopped that project, and now it's giving the project to China. He says, today everything is clear to everyone. The Russian law visits to Iran, standing by Hezbollah and giving the Anaklia project to China, refusing American and European investments. But he's also saying, we will send away the Russian regime to Moscow in October, referencing to the elections that are coming at the end of October. What do you expect of the opposition to do before the elections, and how do you see the performance? Is the opposition going to be able to win the elections? This is one of the questions we're already getting on our chat.
Yes, very briefly about Anaklia deep sea port. 2 days immediately after overriding presidential veto on the Russian law and overriding presidential veto on the offshore law, announcing that Anaklia deep sea port now will be in the hands of Chinese company, which, by the way, has very problematic record and has been sanctioned by the World Bank and U.S. Department of Commerce, as far as I know, is continuation of a very wrong, very damaging signal sent by Georgian Dream to the West that we want to be isolated from the West, not Georgian people, but this is GD's policy. So it's parts of the puzzle, and Anaklia is a very big part of this puzzle, where they want to put Georgia among authoritarian regimes rather than democratic countries who appreciate freedom and rule of law and human rights. So opposition needs to respond to a very dramatic challenge, I would say, in a very smart but clearly very peaceful manner. And unity is something which comes in mind first, I guess. It doesn't necessarily mean one unified list, because of very specific context in Georgia, where we have to keep in mind that even among opposition-minded voters, there are certain factors which needs to be kept in mind. However, it's very important for the opposition to offer to Georgian voters a very clear choice, and maybe 2 or maximum 3 gravity centers within the opposition are how we see the process should go on, and we're working on building certain coalitions. I have to clarify that the law does not allow coalitions, formally speaking, but we all understand that some sort of unity is necessary, and we are figuring out what will be the best formula of unity to make sure that the votes are not lost, because the threshold is very high, 5%. So the votes are not lost, and that we give opposition voters possibility and comfort to choose within the opposition, rather than say, I still go back and vote for GD because I'm afraid of opposition winning, or to have some memories from the past which do not allow to go to change their political preferences. So that needs a very smart solution.
What are the public attitudes at the moment? What does the public think about the elections according to opinion polls?
Well, there is very big awakening in Georgia, I would say. Unprecedented amount of people who are very active and who are very decisive that they will take part in elections. Because one of the biggest problems for previous years was that big part of the public was not active. They thought it doesn't concern them. They did not see meaning for them to go and make a choice. So a lot of people stayed at home. So now I think these elections will witness unprecedented amount of voters, and we also understand we have to work on that. It's not given. But also there is some fear that will we, people say, be really able to change the power via elections? They fear that Russian oligarch Ivanishvili will not quit like that because he is not a Democrat. He doesn't understand rules of the democratic play. So here we need very strong, not we as a party or as politicians here, Georgian nation, Georgian people need very strong support from its democratic friends and partners, as I said, to make sure that there is very rigorous monitoring. We understand this is a difficult year for everyone because there are elections almost everywhere, but for Georgia, it's really existential elections. It's like a referendum. Do we choose Russia or do we choose Europe and Euro-Atlantic future? And a huge huge things are at stake. And as I said, whatever happens in Georgia is not just about Georgia. We see what Russia is doing in Ukraine. We see Russia trying to influence the situation in Moldova. And definitely Russia is trying to take Georgia back, which will have consequences beyond Georgia. And as I said, increasing Chinese influence, as we see in Tbilisi and Aklia port, and not only, is something which worries us, and not only us. So these are very, very important elections. So we will respond with some sort of unity and clarity in terms of the choices, and work very rigorously with voters. But Georgian people, Georgian democracy needs support from US, support from the European Union, some acts are symbolic, but means a lot for the people on the ground who are fighting and risking everything.
Georgia is pretty much going through the same process of Moldova. You mentioned Moldova. Just like Moldova, Georgia in the past, Georgia is a captured state by a Russian-made billionaire who behind the scenes controls the entire government and parliament. Moldova went through this with Plahotniuc and managed to get rid of him. So through a democratic election, this is possible. The question is to what extent others have learned lessons. The autocrats have learned lessons from the ouster of the pro-Russian parties in Moldova. And we see now how Russia is turning back to Moldova to do the same division within society with this disinformation and criticism of the government in order to recapture power. But let me ask you another question here on the chat from Janusz Bugajski, our senior fellow. What is the government saying about Abkhazia and South Ossetia? Is it trying to fool the public by claiming that they will return to Georgia as long as Tbilisi has good relations with Russia?
Well, thank you for this question. Certainly, the government is trying to play on a very sensitive issue for Georgia, for all Georgians. Well, I have to say, by the way, that a very similar law as Russian law is now also in the pipeline in Abkhazia, and people are fighting there against this law. So whatever happens in Tbilisi will very much have consequences in what happens in Sukhumi in terms of public mood, etc. I think GD, as a very clearly very propagandist actor, will try to play this extremely sensitive card. But I'm pretty sure that Georgian public has learned lessons and will not fall into this trap, because it's very unconvincing. The government saying that they will find ways to unite with our Abkhazian and Ossetian citizens, when they cannot, when this government cannot find common language with its own citizens living in Georgia, unoccupied part of Georgia. So I'm sure this government is not well suited to do anything in the interests of Georgia, so it will just be propaganda. And we are aware how they can play with propaganda, and I think Georgian public is now better prepared to see the truth and to distinguish it from propaganda.
Thank you. I already asked the question of Peter Jeceni here, and I will unite the Stephen Shapiro's question with Elishbar question here on the charter. Please reiterate your position on joining President Zarubashvili proposed plan charter. Could opposition unity be forged, particularly through to the president's initiative? Could Georgian politicians sideline their egos and come together to defeat the Georgian Dream in October? And the other question she's asking is, to talk more about the initiative to involve Georgian diaspora to get out and vote. Does the law allow this? And is this going to be on the books for the upcoming election, or the Georgian Dream Party is going to change it? What is the situation there? 162,000 people who have left the country, Alice Barr says, and this is very, as you pointed out, it's very important for them to be able to vote.
Yes. Thank you for these questions. Presidential charter and generally the role of the president is very positive, particularly when it comes to defending Georgia's European future, and she's very outspoken and she's very active. Regarding the charter, I think there are some issues where there can be some differences of opinion, but in general, I think the spirit of this document and the spirit of the initiative is something which is shared by my party and by many other parties, fortunately. And yes, we do have differences, but I think we've demonstrated several times already that we can put aside those differences. For example, in the parliament, we are fighting side by side, all opposition parties except for the proxy opposition. We are fighting, including physically, side by side against Russian law and against Georgian Dream's repressive policies. So I think it's there. As for egos, well, I do agree. I'm a newcomer to politics. I'm coming from the civil society sector. Sometimes I do see big egos too. So what I'm trying is to show my own example and to show little ego and more determination for unity.
You're new to politics, but you have extensive experience working for President Margvishvili in the past. So you've done a lot of political work, even from the NGO perspective.
That's true. Yes. So yeah, I think what's very, very important is to focus on the things that needs to be done, and whoever does it better, those people need to be given more possibilities. I think it should be a totally merit-based process, and I'm sure these elections will give opportunity to people who do to do many good things, also outlined in the charter. The reforms, we need extensive reforms. I think the second round of the fight, after we win the first round with Ivanishvili, it will be no less difficult, to be very honest, to fight the entrenched forces in the court and in the law enforcement, in the state security system, everything. But we are ready for that fight. Diaspora, yes, extremely important. Now the law provides for the possibility, but we've called the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Parliament specifically on this issue. Executive branch, so it's the law and its enforcement is in the hands of the executive branch, and the executive branch is controlled by the party. So we are doing our best to mobilize people, diaspora, so that they follow the legal procedures and they are able to vote. And we are putting pressure on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And also, as I said, we are working with partner countries so that for our diaspora abroad, even illegal immigrants, and I'm very open about it, to have assurances that they will not face legal problems if they go and vote on that particular date. And it's a tricky issue, it's a sensitive issue. But yes, a Moldovan example was mentioned here, and you very well know how critical the role of diaspora was in the change of power in Moldova. So we are working on that. It's very high priority for us. And thank you for asking.
Thank you very much. And let me now turn to Ambassador Courtney and ask him the main question that is in the mind of everyone here watching Georgia from Washington and watching Georgia from the United States. What should we do to help Georgia, to help Georgian civil society, to help the Georgian political parties fight the threat of authoritarianism returning to Georgia?
Thank you, Margarita. Appreciate it. Anna, thanks for your very thoughtful comments. They're very, very helpful. At this point, there are a number of expressions in the West of deep concern about the foreign agent law. But at this point, expressions of deep concern or calls for more diplomacy are really too little too late. Georgian Dream seems determined to pursue its anti-democratic, anti-Western course. On May the 23rd, in a timely and appropriate move, Secretary of State Tony Blinken took concrete action. He announced a new, more restrictive U.S. visa policy for individuals who are, quote, responsible for suppressing civil society and freedom of peaceful assembly in Georgia through a campaign of violence or intimidation, end quote. So, for example, members of parliament who voted for the law, they could be vulnerable to such measures, as could be law enforcement and judicial officers who enforce the law. Ambassador Robin Dunnigan, our current ambassador in Tbilisi, emphasizes that America's partnership over the last 32 years is based on shared values and a shared desire for Georgia to join the Western family of democracies. This value-based partnership lies at the core of strong U.S.-Georgian relations. These relations will take a turn for the worse, however, if Georgian Dream uses the foreign agent law and other measures to rig the October elections. For example, as is done, the government could deny access to voting stations for independent monitors from NGOs tagged as, quote, foreign agents, end quote. Advertising in foreign agent media could also be banned. This has happened in Russia. And this has forced many independent media in Russia into bankruptcy or to relocating abroad. As with the new U.S. visa policy, Georgia's friends should apply restrictive measures against the current leadership, but not against the Georgian people. So meaningful and targeted sanctions now might raise costs too and help deter Ivanishvili and his team from making further attempts to rob Georgians of their freedom and independence. For U.S. measures, such as specifying individuals as specially designated nationals, are possible, and Anna, of course, talked about personal sanctions. Sharper anti-democratic or anti-Western turns in Georgia could result in added sanctions. Coordinated U.S. and European measures may have the greatest effect. The leverage of the EU with its accession privilege is of special value in this. Georgia's relations, we are confident, will someday improve. An NDI poll last November showed that 79% of Georgian respondents backed EU membership. An IRI poll revealed that 77% of respondents saw Russia as the greatest political threat to Georgia. These attitudes and 3 decades of democratic progress and close Western ties will surely influence Georgia's future direction. So too, in a negative way, will Russia's occupation of a fifth of Georgia's territory. So these considerations build confidence that the current lurch toward an authoritarian pro-Russian course will not last in Georgia. In our view, Georgians will not be denied their European or democratic future that they have worked so hard to attain. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Peter, do you want to ask a question of the ambassador?
Well, Mr. Ambassador Courtney, I think the first question would be to say, what do you think are the biggest observable changes in Georgian society from the time that you served there to the present? Mm-hmm. Because I think it's worth noting some of the changes that have taken place and like why these opinion polls have ended up where they are and how Georgian opinions have changed and developed as the country has grown further and further away from sort of Soviet domination.
So I served there quite some time ago, just over a quarter century in the mid-1990s. At that time, it was already evident that Georgians saw themselves as a society that was going to move closer to Europe, closer to the West. They saw Russia as a threat, and Russia's intervention in the civil war in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, if you will, strengthened that perception of Georgians. But Georgia still has Soviet structures, ex-Soviet officials were still in power. So there was a long climb out of that. But over that period of now, over a quarter century, the Georgians have made remarkable progress. Georgia has a pretty enviable democracy. But in recent years, there have been changes. So, for example, a couple of years ago, not that long ago, in the West, we saw Georgia and Ukraine as in somewhat similar situations. Well, the Baltics had reformed the most, and of course already became EU and NATO members. Of the others, Georgia and Ukraine had made the most progress. But then something happened. And so in Ukraine, we see even despite this full-scale war, that Ukraine has maintained its democracy and its Western orientation. But in Georgia, we've seen a turn backward. I think in the West, we're kind of puzzled about the reasons for that, but it's been quite noticeable. Yet the public opinion polls show that Georgians themselves are still very much oriented toward a more democratic and European future. So that gives us a lot of hope for the future.
And we've discussed Georgia today in the context of Georgia for itself, and I think it's important to recognize the aspirations of the Georgian people and what they have been trying to achieve since they became an independent country. But I'm assuming that there are other interests, and that you see other interests that the United States has other than Georgia's democratic progress and the ability of its people to achieve those aspirations to be more part of the transatlantic and European community. But what other interests do you see the United States as having in Georgia and the Caucasus? And what are the bigger ramifications that we should be considering in this that go beyond Georgia's borders, but have to do with its geographic positioning and its government's sort of position?
Okay, sure. So if one tries to assess what are U.S. interests in Georgia beyond democratic development, which is really a fundamental interest, at the beginning of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the U.S. and Europe, the number one interest that they discussed was supporting the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all the former Soviet republics, including Georgia. And that continues to be a fundamental U.S. and Western interest. From the U.S. perspective, of course, a top priority for us is to protect American citizens, help American businesses abroad. And so that's certainly true because we have citizens in Georgia. Right now, because of the sanctions on Russia, the U.S. is particularly concerned to continue cooperation with Georgia to ensure that critical components for Russia's military operations do not pass through Georgia. Law enforcement cooperation with Georgia is important in countering nuclear smuggling and terrorism, for example. An open trading route through Georgia for Armenia to the Black Sea is an important interest for us. Armenia is now trying to loosen its Russian grip, if you will, and move a bit more toward a more independent posture and closer ties with the West. The U.S. has an interest in the issue of whether Russia puts warships in Ochimchir, in the port there. That's something that the Russians have announced, in great part because the Ukrainians have very cleverly attacked Russian warships around Crimea. And so Russia's moved a number of those warships east to Novorossiysk and some other places. So Russian warships based in Georgia would be something that would be a concern to us. Although I would point out that those warships would be vulnerable to attack in clever ways, just as Ukraine has done. And then we cooperate with Georgia in a number of multilateral formats, OSCE, United Nations, things like that, and issues like pandemic preparedness and trafficking in persons. So we want to continue that cooperation.
Yeah, and if I can add, the incredible role Georgia is playing as international energy transition transport corridor from the Caspian Sea to Europe, to Turkey, and then to Europe through the Black Sea and through the Southern Gas Corridor, Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan pipeline. And that corridor
Yes,
is
you're quite right.
expanding now to become the middle
Yes.
corridor from Central Asia through the Caucasus to Europe, which is putting Georgia in a very important geopolitical position to maintain that participation in major international energy and transportation networks. How do you expect the Georgia Dream government could continue undermining this? They already undermined the port in Anaklia. Could they undermine the middle corridor as well?
They certainly could. I did not mention the middle corridor. The middle corridor is primarily a European interest rather than a U.S. interest. We generally, of course, support cooperation and energy transport, as we have, for example, the Baku Tbilisi Ceyhan pipeline. But most of the middle corridor transportation will go into Turkey or Mediterranean Sea to European or North African ports. The Georgian Dream could indeed have an influence on that. Much of that will depend on the kind of investment that's attracted. So the Chinese award that has been announced now suggests that the Chinese may be willing to make a substantial investment. Before, there was a question whether the West would make the kind of investment that Georgia was hoping for. And there's been an issue about trade volumes and whether trade volumes would support a port of the scope that had been planned for. And there was an issue about whether there should be guarantees from the Georgian government for some of that investment. Willing to invest more, it's hard to know, but Georgian Dream will, if the Chinese are willing to invest more, Georgian Dream for its own political and economic purposes.
Thank you. Here we have a question for Anna from Dodona Kiziria, who asks, in spite of unprecedented scale of demonstrations against the Russian law, the Georgian people, unfortunately, lost the battle. What makes you think that they will win the elections?
Thank you. Before answering the question, I very quickly want to mention one more issue. Georgian military has been one of the biggest contributors in the peace missions, peace and security missions, and we've lost many of our citizens in the fight for global peace and security. And this is the point where Georgia was contributing, not just receiving help from the international community, including US, but also contributing. And I wish it was not for human lives, but we are very thankful to Georgian soldiers who lost their lives and their health to make Georgia contributing to global peace and security, and we will never forget their role in the whole process. Indeed. As for the question, let me disagree with the formulation of the situation. I don't think we've lost anything yet, though we can lose it. We can lose it, and I think in this fight, which we are having with BI and his group of people, I think pessimism is not a very good friend. So I don't want to sound naively optimistic, but I'm reasonably optimistic because I've been, as Margarita mentioned, I haven't been directly in politics for many years, but I've been publicly involved in many processes, and I've never seen such an awakening in Georgia. I've never seen so many determined people with citizen mentality that this is our fight and no one is going to come and save us. We need to do it on our own. And if we do it on our own, then we will have partners and friends. But the job needs to be done by Georgians. It is our country. We need to fight for it. So, as I said, there is some skepticism that Russian oligarch will not allow elections to be the day when he gets defeated. But let me tell you, I'm not thinking that we will be sitting doing nothing and then people will come on election day and change it. No. They need to be defeated before elections. And these days, they are getting enormous damage in the eyes of their own people who are voters in 5 months' time. So the government needs to be defeated in these 5 months. It's elections, it's just when it gets, when it gets legally, the change is then legally administered, so to say. But defeat will come before, because, there is no other form of change of power than elections. So this is why we are mentioning and stressing always elections. Georgia doesn't need any other form of change of power for the sake of the people, for the sake of Georgia's future. We are just thinking about elections. This is the democratic means. This is the means of change of power recognized by the civilized nations. But, as I said, morally, electorally, ethically, politically, they will be defeated before election day. And this is what we are doing on a daily basis. And it's a process. It's a process. GD has never lost that many voters, and as in past 1 month. And let me tell you, just to understand the sentiment, some people were not so sure about the detrimental nature of the Russian law. Because the propaganda is very large scale, etc., etc. But when they saw young people in the streets fighting, and then when they saw the government attacking people in the streets, attacking peaceful demonstrators, when they saw opposition not being allowed in the parliament to speak, when we were forced out of the committee hearings, when our microphones were turned off, so that we do not speak and be able to communicate with the public who wanted to follow the committee hearings and understand the content, then a lot of people realized that this is something really wrong here. If you are adopting a good law, why do you need violence? Why do you need repressions? Why do you need the parliament full of law enforcement officials and security services? Why do you need to kick out of the committee hearings opposition? If you have argument, you say the argument, you don't shut them up. So I think trust me, it's a very painful process. We are giving up everything. I'm giving up my own personal security. I'm giving up my personal health. And everyone else is doing the same in this fight. But it's a process. We have 5 months to defeat the oligarch. We have very serious international support. We have very serious attention. And this meeting is just one proof that we are not alone, that we have friends, that we are, we have friends and people who stand strong and have belief in Georgian people, and we should have belief in our own self. Georgian history, as you very well know, probably better than me, my fellow citizens, Georgia's history has never been easy. And we have always had very, very powerful enemies, 10 times more powerful than Georgian people, but we've defeated them. So I think it's about belief in ourselves, and it's about standing strong and not letting them win in our brains. Change first happens here, and we are determined to make this power change happen, because, you know, we have very famous king, David the Builder, who had existential fight in his times, did Gori, and what he did was that he closed the road so that the army could not go back. So it was just one direction they could walk to fight the enemy. So there is no way back. We cannot go anywhere if we do not win this fight. And no one is going to, you know, 2 million people are not going to go into the immigration. No, definitely not.
This time, though, the Georgians themselves, the people themselves, are choosing that one direction road ahead, to where they want to be. And in that connection, let me ask one question about NATO membership. What impact will the democratic reversal in Georgia have on its path to NATO membership, which is supported by the overwhelming majority of the population? Will there be any statement on Georgia at the upcoming NATO summit in Washington, D.C.? And this is a question for both of you. What do you expect from the summit? Thank you.
Ambassador, would you like to go first, or?
Sure, thank you. First, let me say, Anna, your statement was so eloquent and so moving. I really applaud. It is, as you point out, it's really courageous Georgians who are going to make the difference in this, as they have so often in the past. So I think the world just admires the courage of Georgians every day going into the streets to express their views. Regarding NATO membership, the real issue lying ahead of Georgia is not NATO membership at this point. It is EU accession negotiations. That's actually more important for Georgia's ability to improve its living standards and improve quality of life for people. But probably that will come first before NATO in terms of decision making. So it's clear that, of course, Georgia, with the current government, could not go into the EU or NATO with the current anti-Western, anti-democratic approach that the current government is taking. NATO will be an issue, and I think there will be a lot of support for Georgia to have closer and closer ties with NATO as time goes on. The war in Ukraine will have some impact on how NATO views additional entrants in the future. Ukraine has fought so bravely and so skillfully that there's probably going to be a lot of sympathy for NATO joining, for Ukraine joining NATO in the future. Georgia is likely to be a little further behind. Anna?
Yes. Thank you, Ambassador, for your encouragement. Yeah, I agree with what you said about NATO and Georgia's prospects. Just one very brief reminder. 2 years ago, my political group initiated a resolution about NATO and Georgia's NATO aspirations and how important it is for us, and we stay committed to the NATO path, etc., etc. And the passing the resolution was delayed many times by the parliament. And when I asked to the Foreign Affairs Committee chair that, so what's happening? It's just the resolution which reiterates what is already in the constitution, what is officially declared policy of the country. So let's have all-party resolution, which will be a good thing, you know, to reaffirm our commitment on NATO path. And I'm quoting him. He said, we've recently passed a resolution on NATO, and 2 NATO-related resolutions in 1 year is too much. Don't you think so? So I think that tells the story, attitude. And so, of course, now what is being attacked is Georgia's European future and Georgia's European aspirations, but we can imply NATO there as well. And I think even more, because for Russia, Georgia joining NATO is a very painful issue. I think even not less painful than Georgia joining EU, I would put it like that. So, but for Georgian people, the commitment remains the same. I think after the war in Ukraine, there is even bigger understanding for the need of Georgia's Euro-Atlantic future. And although there is very strong disinformation and propaganda, I think it cannot damage Georgian people's aspirations towards neither towards EU nor towards NATO. So I hope one day we will make it there too.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much, Ambassador Courtney. I'll turn now to Peter to conclude this meeting. Your contributions were absolutely excellent, and we really appreciate them.
Thank you so much.
We're closing in on 11 o'clock, and we promised a 1-hour event. But I want to thank you so much, Anna, for joining us and to giving your perspective. It's both analytic and inspiring. And we appreciate you making the time to help provide some context directly from the ground of what has been taking place in Georgia and how to understand what will likely unfold in the months ahead, and hopefully what we will see at the elections in the future. And thank you, Ambassador Courtney, for joining us and offering your perspective.
Sure.
You've probably been one of the longest sort of focused observers in the United States on Georgia, and not only observing but acting in a policy setting and offering sound advice. So thank you both for your perspectives, and thank you all of you at the audience for joining us at Jamestown this morning. We will post the video on YouTube, on our YouTube channel shortly, and I hope you will join us for future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.